More AWS studying can actually make AWS feel way more confusing. Now, the reality is that you've bounced between YouTube videos, certifications, Udemy courses, and project tutorials, right? You've put in the hours, and maybe you've even passed a certification or you've even built a few projects. But the knowledge that you feel like you have is still very scattered, all right? You have all of the pieces together, but you have no idea how they fit together. If I ask you what EC2, S3, IAM, or VPC does, you can definitely answer. But the moment that someone gives you a blank business problem and they ask you the question of how would you build this on AWS, then obviously your knowledge disappears. Then you open a job description and it says that you should be able to design, deploy, and troubleshoot real systems. You recognize every single word, but you still don't feel like you're ready to apply. Or you reach an interview, someone says, why do you design the project this way? Your mind goes blank because you have not designed anything. You just followed along and it felt like you were learning. And what this does is, and I've seen this so many times, is that this leaves you in a very strange middle. You've done too much work to feel like you're a complete beginner, but you still don't feel quite job ready. So you wait until you've mastered AWS, you start another course, another 6 months passes, and it gets a little bit uncomfortable because you may have trained yourself to recognize these AWS services, but without actually learning how to make engineering decisions with them. And those are two completely different skill sets to have. I'm Suleiman. I've been in tech for more than 11 years, and I've spent more than 7 of those working with AWS across cloud infrastructure, architecture, DevOps, and consulting for some of the biggest companies in the world. And I've seen this pattern all the time, right? People who are not starting from zero, who have genuinely put in the work and the time, sometimes after a 10-hour workday, but they still can't see which piece is actually missing. So I'm going to show you the 3 reasons why this happens, how to identify your exact gap, and what to change so AWS finally starts making sense as one coherent system. So reason number 1 is that you've learned services before you've learned the problems. Now, most AWS learning is organized around services, right? IAM, then EC2, then S3, then Lambda, then VPC, then databases. You end up knowing a little bit about everything, but you still cannot connect it into one coherent system. And that makes sense for teaching you the platform, but it's not how the real cloud engineering work actually happens, right? A business does not ask you to demonstrate how an EC2 works. They say that our application is crashing every time that we run a promotion, we're losing customers, and our team is small, and this cannot happen again. Now, you actually have to think, what is failing? What needs to scale? What must stay private? What happens when one component goes down? What can the company actually afford to run? Only after that you understand those constraints should you start choosing the AWS services to use. So if you begin with a list of AWS services, every service looks relevant and AWS feels massive, right? Enormous. Now, if you begin with the problem that you're trying to solve, the constraints eliminate most of the options for you. And the same applies for your target role. If you've not decided what cloud engineering work that you're preparing for, every AWS topic looks equally the same and equally important. So you want to choose the target first, then learn the services and decisions that repeatedly appear in the work that you're trying to do. Make sense? Great. Reason number 2 is that tutorials are making the decisions for you. Now, here's the thing. When you follow a tutorial, everything feels very obvious, right? The instructor creates the VPC. They choose the subnets. They add the load balancer. They write the Terraform code, and they explain every single step. So your brain says, I understand this, but recognition is not the same as independent understanding. Recognition means that it makes sense when you see it. Independent understanding means that you can recreate it without those steps. Engineering judgment means that you can change it when the requirements change and you can explain why. So remove the tutorial and change one specific condition. What if the traffic becomes unpredictable? What if the data must remain private? What if the team cannot manage servers? What if keeping the system online matters more to the business than keeping the cost low? Can you still build it and explain why the new design makes sense? AI makes this gap easier to hide. It can draw the architecture, it can write the Terraform. But when an interviewer changes one requirement and asks you why this design, AI cannot answer for you. And you may have known the night before when you're prompting the AI, right? But now in the interview, your mind goes blank because you outsourced the execution, but you also outsourced the understanding as well. Now, this catches even experienced people as well, right? You can work in IT or DevOps and complete the assigned task, but still struggle when someone hands you a blank business problem and asks you to architect it from scratch. Now, something to know is that just because you have a finished project, it doesn't mean it's automatically a strong piece of proof for your portfolio, because an employer needs to see the decisions that you've made and not only the resources and services that you use to deploy. Reason number 3 is that nobody is correcting your thinking, right? The truth is, a project can deploy successfully and still contain a lot of weak decisions. It might be unnecessarily complicated and over-engineered and insecure and too expensive, or built with the right service, but actually for the wrong reasons. A tutorial tells you whether you follow the tutorial. It does not tell you whether your thinking is actually strong or your thinking is actually correct. If nobody reviews the decision that you're making, you can complete 10 projects for your portfolio on your own, while you're still repeating the same blind spot every single time. And that is the problem with these blind spots, right? You cannot correct what you cannot see, and you cannot correct what you cannot understand. Eventually, it shows up somewhere, right? You delay applications because you don't feel ready, your projects sit in your GitHub without creating any sort of conversations, or you reach a scenario interview and you cannot explain the work that you already completed. This is why the answer is not always just do another Udemy course or another certification or a project. At some point, you need someone to actually inspect your work, right? To identify what you cannot see and tell you what to stop wasting your time on. You need someone asking, why did you choose this? What alternative did you reject? What happens when this component fails? That correction is what turns the repetition into actual improvement. So you really want to stop measuring progress by how many services that you recognize, right? And you want to start measuring it by how many decisions that you could explain. Therefore, you can use my 3-part loop: problem, decision, proof. Firstly, start with the problem. What does the business need? What must be secure? What could fail? What are the limits around the cost, the time, the scale, and the team maintaining it? Secondly, the decision, right? Which architecture fits those constraints that you're working with? Why did you choose each service? What alternative did you reject? And what trade-offs did you accept? Thirdly, the proof. Build it, test it, break it, fix it, and then explain it without hiding behind a tutorial. So something that I want you to do after this video is take one AWS project that you've already done and built, close a tutorial, and answer these 5 questions. What business problem was this solving? Which constraints actually mattered? Why did I choose these AWS services? What alternative did I reject? And how would I prove this solution works? Then explain the architecture out loud in just 90 seconds. Now, if you cannot begin without reopening the tutorial, you have an independent build gap. If you can draw the system, but you cannot explain your choices, you have a decision and a communication gap. If your explanation collapses when one requirement changes, you need one more problem-solving rep. If you can build, adapt, and explain it clearly, but you still can't get no interviews, AWS understanding may not be the bottleneck. So you want to inspect your target roles, your CV, your GitHub, your project presentations, and your application approach. And then you can figure out what is actually missing, because you can't just keep restarting this cycle of learning and learning and learning and think that things will change and the confusion will disappear. Now, look, if you're still exploring cloud or your action so far has mainly been watching videos, you need foundations and a small guided build first, right? But if you've decided that cloud is your primary direction, you've taken real action through studying projects, cloud, DevOps work, applications, or interviews, and you can point to a specific place where you keep getting stuck, then that is a stage that we help you with inside of our Cloud Engineering Academy. If you have pieced together the resources from everywhere, maybe you've got a certification or you build a project, but you still think that I'm not ready to apply for jobs yet, or your mind goes blank when somebody asks you to defend what you've built, more random information is probably not the answer here, right? So you can just use the link in the description below to book a call with my team. We'll look at what you've studied so far, what you've built, what you've targeted, and then we'll identify whether the thing keeping you stuck is your foundations or your projects or your positioning or the way that you explain your work in interviews. If we can help, then we'll show you how. If we can't, then we'll tell you that as well. We also have a school community that you can kind of go into as well. It's completely free. You have access to plenty of resources. There's 10,000 members in there, and you can book a call from there as well. And then once you book the call and you're interested, we can show you inside of our actual VIP program. Either way, if you book a call or not, one thing that I want you to do is stop asking which AWS service should I learn next. You want to start asking, what problem am I solving? Why does this design make sense? And can I defend this without a tutorial? That is when AWS stops feeling like hundreds of disconnected services and it starts feeling like a set of tools that you know how to use. Make sense? As always, I'm rooting for you. Go and become undeniable. Good luck.